Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answers should shine. The fact is fiction, conviction.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories.
Good afternoon, Maine. My name is Chuck Ellis. As always, I am your host on the Muddy Waters Podcast. I'm stumbling over my words, which happens to me a lot. If you saw my testimony from yesterday at the Westbrook School Board meeting, you notice I stumbled a bunch of times. It was a lot of fun. Not. But anyway, the Muddy Waters Podcast, as you know, exists to help the people in Maine better understand what's going on in our state by seeking, in the first place, to educate the people and talk about the things that the mainstream media, which has become a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party, does not want the people to know and understand. They want you to be confused. They want you to focus on what is happening in Washington, D.C., or at the current time in Iran, rather than paying attention to what's happening at your school board meeting, your city council meeting, or in the state legislature. And so we bring on people like our guest today who have knowledge and experience from what's actually happening in our world here that you can make a difference in. So thank you for joining us, Representative Rachel Henderson.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. I've really appreciated some of the things that I've heard you saying and doing in the legislature, seeking to do the job of actually representing the people. It's sad to say that so many people down there don't actually care to represent the people. But there's also like the job. I always try to thank legislators like yourself for doing such a thankless job in a time, especially when we're in the minority, where you show up, work long hours, take a bunch of crap from the Democrats, ultimately, a lot of like snide comments, a lot of condescension, and they just do what they want. And to many, it can feel like, what is the point and why even show up? Why even do the job? But you do, and not enough people do it. And then at the same time, you end up getting crap from us voters on why don't you do more when you have no capacity to do more unless we, the voters, do a better job of getting you help in Augusta. And so I always want to thank people for not only doing that, but agreeing to come on shows like this and talk about the painful events of your life, which is called politics.
Yeah, I think they say war is hell and politics is war. And it's the reality. And thank you for the appreciation. I think, in some instances we do get a lot of, thanks and praise for the work that we do. And then other times it feels like, we just get walked all over and stepped on, and people don't fully understand the hours that go in, the work that goes in. None of us get into state politics to get rich. I know many of us who are worth a whole lot less now that we've been in politics for a while than when we started. And really, that's the way it should be, right? It means that we're actually doing something right. that this is a public service and we're providing a public service. But also in some ways, I'm kind of thankful that the general public doesn't really know all of what goes into it, right? They elect us to do a job and to go down there and to roll up our sleeves and walk through the trenches and do the hard work. I've never been one to scream over a little bit of pain. So I'm thankful to go there and to do the work that the people have elected me to do. But I do appreciate your appreciation today. So thanks, Chuck.
Well, thanks. Well, again, I appreciate what you do. And so before we jump into a bunch of you're a representative out of what area, what district, and what are the towns you serve?
Yeah, so I'm in the western part of the state, Oxford County, my hometown of Rumford. I also represent Bethel and Byron, Roxbury, Hanover, Milton, and Byron.
Does that mean that you're technically the representative of Tucker Carlson?
He's Bryant Pond, so I think there's a territorial dispute between myself, like my district and the neighboring district. Either one of us at different times, depending on what subject he's talking about, would be happy to take him. Other times we might want to pass him off.
Yeah, well, he is controversial, and I think he's always been controversial, but now he seems to be in a bit of a divide within the Republican Party, which is fascinating. But yeah, interesting fun fact. I'm pretty sure he buys his groceries in your neck of the woods would be my guess, because I don't think there's a big enough shop to buy that type of stuff unless he gets into Rumford. But anyway, that's kind of a little fun fact. So before we jump into talking about the specifics of what it is that you do in Augusta, we were starting to get into how a bill becomes law kind of stuff, which is it should seem like something that everybody should know, but as I was saying, I don't. There are aspects of it that I definitely don't understand, and so I think it's helpful to have that conversation. But also, who are you? Where do you come from? And what in the world possessed you to want to be an elected official in the 21st century?
Well, that last question, I don't know if I've found the answer to, because I just keep going back for more. But my story isn't that different from many rural Mainers. I grew up in this area, in the Rumford, Andover area. Spent a few years in New Hampshire. My family moved us over there, but we moved to Berlin, New Hampshire, which is like New Hampshire's version of Rumford, right? It's a little mill town. It's got, sub and pizza shops on every corner. It kind of has different areas, different districts, different cliques, but really a lot of the same type of people: farmers, loggers, mill workers. So, I grew up in a family of 5. I had an older brother and a younger brother. And, my dad worked hard. My parents loved each other. And I think 2 things right there, just kind of if I could look back on where I came from and who I am, is I had parents that loved each other and a father that worked hard and made it so that my mom could stay home and raise us 3 kids. At times she homeschooled. At times we did public school. When I was a teenager, we went to a very small private school, but not because my parents were rich. My very first job at 14, I think I turned 15 that summer. I went down the coast in the Rockland, Camden area to live with my aunt and uncle and cleaned mansions. They had a cleaning business and cleaned big mansions on the coast. And I paid all of my tuition, and I bought my school supplies and my uniforms for that next year of school, because mom and dad had 3 kids and they wanted to send me to private school and I wanted to go. So it was a matter of, kiddo, you want to go, you're going to have to work for it. And I did. And, the next summer I got a job milking cows. So at 15, I started milking cows. And this next part kind of sounds like I walked to school uphill both ways in the snowstorm kind of a story. But on a Bible, this is God's honest truth. My family had 1 vehicle, and my dad worked shift work at the mill. And the farm that I worked at was about 8.5, 9 miles from the house. And I would oftentimes have a morning shift and a night shift. So I do the morning milking and the evening milking. Well, I had a job. And if dad had the car, he was working overnights and the vehicle wasn't back, or if he'd left for day shift, I biked to my job, 8.5, 9 miles at 4 o'clock in the morning. with a backpack with a change of clothes, and I biked home. And the same thing in the evenings. It wasn't all the time, but probably more than half the time. And it was just, my parents were really firm and strong on, if you have a commitment, you keep it. And you made a commitment to these people. This is their livelihood. You're going to go milk all 180 cows at 5:30 in the morning. So did that work, and had a job ever since. Always had a job since I was 14, one or two, or sometimes even three. And then, worked some odd jobs, different types of things in my 20s. I was a nanny for a little while. I was a line cook. I was a forklift driver and a ripsaw operator for a couple years. Just kind of did a little bit of everything until I found my niche in business. I started in sales and worked my way up to executive management over the course of a few years. And then I was approached to run for the legislature. And they kind of, I hate to say headhunted me, but the chair of the GOP party here in Oxford County and I had become friendly through my work. And he approached me and kind of laid it out on the table. Wasn't perfectly honest about the time commitment it was going to be a legislator. And so I try my best to be honest when I'm talking to people, asking them if they want to run. Just a couple days a week, January through April, you make a couple $1,000s, it'll be great. And that's just not the reality of it. But even that, I was at a point in my career where I had worked really hard through sales, then co-manager, became manager of the store, became a junior member of executive management over multiple locations in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and then became a permanent member of executive management. And I was on track to become either the VP of operations manager. I was on track to move up in the company. And, getting into politics just wasn't the trajectory my life was taking. So I said no. And he came back to me, I think it was a couple days later, and he asked me again. And I said, no, don't ask me again. I've already given you my answer. So when he asked me a third time, he says, just go home and think about it. I want you just to go home and think about it. So I did go home, and I hadn't been home 30 minutes, and I'm thinking, what on earth am I doing? Why would I not take this opportunity? I've grown up in rural Maine. I've worked my tail off. I watched my father, work himself right into the hospital, into early retirement. All my friends, parents work hard. People I'm surrounded with, the people in this River Valley are just good, solid, resourceful, hard workers. Why on earth would I not go and try to be a voice for those people in a place that seems to have forgotten them? And I ran a race. I was a replacement candidate. I ran a race for about 3.5 months. Apparently the people liked me because they elected me, and then they elected me again on a greater margin. More people voted for me. And my hope is that the same thing will happen this November, is that they'll send me back to Augusta to try to be a common sense voice and to represent, like I said, loggers and farmers and mill workers and just tough people.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, obviously, I love the recognition of the value that you bring to people, and I think it's really important to see yourself as a civil servant, that you are actually there for the people to represent them. Stark contrast. I think there's a lot of opportunity for stark contrast between Democrat and Republican right now. Democrat, the government is your daddy and tells you what to do, when to do it, how to do it. The Republicans, we are the party of empowerment. How did that happen? I'm just curious. How did it happen that the party of empowerment became the Republican Party? Because we actually believe in people. We believe you can do much better for yourself than the government can, since the government screws everything up. What is something that the government does well outside of collect taxes? They don't spend them well, but they're really good at making sure they get them for the most part.
I mean, they do a good job at spending all the money. If we want to try to find a silver line, they spend all the money. They just don't spend it effectively or efficiently.
Right.
Or responsibly.
They take it and they spend it, but what they do with it is not responsible, is not good. And they're people in the legislature, even just like, I'm currently like very frustrated with my local government in my town. I have been for years, but I just am getting increasingly more frustrated that the people who get elected there, they pretend to care about the people, but they ultimately are going to do whatever the heck they want, regardless of the impact that it has to the people, especially when it comes to taxes. They're just going to keep increasing, and condescending and talking down to, regardless of reality and the impact that it has on people. And so they definitely don't have a perspective of service. They have a perspective of, we don't want to be in control and make sure the things that we believe should happen will happen, regardless of whether or not that's in the best interest of the people. They're cogs in a big globalist machine known as which the Democratic Party is probably a cog of in and of itself. Anyway, that's a side note, very cheerful comment. But yeah, so the desire to serve the people. And so when you got elected, you were one of the committee. Are you on just the one committee, I'm assuming, or do they put you on multiple committees?
So the Judiciary Committee is the only one I'm on. That one, the Education Committee, Health and Human Services Committee, and kind of starting to become the Energy and Utilities Committee. Those 3 to 4 out of the 17 committees are the ones by far with the most bills that come through, as well as, and the Judiciary Committee handles all of the polarizing issues. So anything to do with gun control, abortion, transgenderism, domestic violence, sexual assault. We now have anything that's anything related to AI or privacy, artificial intelligence, digital privacy, as well as the judicial branch, right? Tort claims, uniform commercial code, like the boring stuff, probate code, probate courts. But for sure, the really polarizing issues that either tend to draw crowds or draw the people that are very passionate on both sides. So yes, just the Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, so you're on and you've been on that since you first got elected.
Correct. I was a glutton from punishment right from the start.
Well, I don't know. Did you get a chance to choose that? I think they normally appoint you to. Yeah, I was gonna say.
No, I did choose it. I did ask for it.
Oh, you did ask for it, and they gave it to you. Okay, nice.
Yeah,
nice. Well, at least there's that. So yeah, glutton for punishment. Well, I'm trying to think of the cases where I've paid attention to public comment and I've clipped some stuff for social media, and I've actually gone and one time given testimony in Augusta. I wanted to go back again when they were doing the boys and girls sports issue again this last year, but I was unable to be there. But I did watch the entire thing and clipped. Well, I have all of it, but I haven't put all of it up into the stratosphere yet. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I noticed you in there every time that I've gone. So anyway, so that's where you are. So like, before we get into some of the other stuff, I do want to have that conversation about like the process, about how a bill kind of becomes law, and what the process is and how much the process matters, how it's supposed to work, and then how it works currently under the Democrat machine.
Yeah, so happy to share. And obviously everything I say is the rule and not the exception too, right? So like there are certain exceptions where this might not be the case, but the typical flow for a bill is, so there's the legislature is comprised of the House of Representatives and the Senate. When a legislator is the only one that can introduce legislation, theoretically, I think the governor can too through somebody, departments can through legislators. But again, this is the rule. So say I were to put a bill in, the first place that it goes would be to the House chamber, and then the House themselves vote on which committee it's supposed to go to. So if I were to put in, let's just say a gun that has to do, or a bill that has to do with artificial intelligence regulation, that would naturally go to the Judiciary Committee. But the House and the Senate both have to agree that that is the committee of jurisdiction. So it goes to the House and then the Senate, and then it goes to committee. Once it's in the possession of committee, a public hearing has to be scheduled and a work session has to be scheduled. Then the beginning of the legislature, there's certain notice periods that are required so that the public can participate in both the public hearing and be present for the work session. So a public hearing is designed to be just to take comments from the public. Members of the committee are not allowed to debate or discuss it amongst ourselves during the committee, but we are permitted to ask clarifying questions to those providing comment. Then when the work session happens, that is when we get an analysis from somebody from Office of Policy and Legal Analysis, OPLA. They come forward and say, because they're all attorneys, they're all incredibly qualified to do this work. We'll say we have probably the cream of the crop when it comes to legal analysts. And they bring the legislation back before the committee and say, objectively, they're nonpartisan staff. These are not, Democrat lawyers. These aren't Republican lawyers. They are hired by the state. And they come and present the work and say, this is what the bill aims to do. This is the current landscape of state law. This is the impacts that it could have. These are the generalized concerns of people who are opposed to the bill, and then the generalized comments of people who are in favor of it, and then if there's any proposed amendments. And with that information, now the committee members are able to debate, to kind of talk through, ask questions, maybe even bring other people forward who might be experts in the field, or who we feel may have some more information to provide to us. And then we vote. Either we change it, we can amend it at that point to make changes to the bill, and then we vote. Once that vote is taken in the committee, it's sent back down to the legislative body in which it originated. Meaning, if it was my AI bill, it would go back to the House because I serve in the House of Representatives. If it was a senator's bill, it would go back to the Senate. And then begins the debate process, right? So people are either for it or they're against it. And then the vote is taken in the House, it gets sent to the Senate. Senate votes, it goes back to the House, and it does that 3 times before it either effectively dies or is enacted.
So really quick too, at committee, before it goes back to committee, there's basically the other thing that maybe you said this and I got distracted in my own brain. It's a scary place. But it also, the committee, not only do they kind of create the version of the bill based on all that information, but they vote on what their recommendation is to the House and Senate chambers, essentially.
Correct.
Right. And sometimes
right. And there can be. Go ahead.
Well, I was learning that sometimes there's a situation where the committee may vote and decide this is what we want to present, but then when they go to their chamber, they'll present a different version.
Yeah, that's correct. So, and this is kind of where the exception to the rule comes into play, yeah. Right? Like all the different ways that it can develop. But when a committee gives a recommendation to the full body, it can either be unanimous. We like the bill, or unanimous, we don't like the bill. Quite frequently, it's the other way around, right? Which is a vote of the majority of the committee likes it or doesn't like it, and vice versa. Sometimes there's even multiple reports where there might be 4 people on ought to pass as amended with one version of the bill, 4 people on ought to pass as amended, another version of the bill, and then maybe there's an ought not to pass, or there's a third amended version. So there isn't always a straight yes or no. Sometimes there's multiple versions and multiple amendments that that can be recommended to the body. But yes, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just to answer your first question, because I kind of got on a little bit of a rabbit trail there. Yes, once it gets down to either the House or the body it originated in, or vice versa, any member of the legislature at that point can put an amendment on the bill. Now, say they can't just do it by themselves. They would present the amendment, explain what the amendment does, and then the body would vote on it, on whether or not they want to adopt that version or that change.
Okay. And this part of this gets into, I mean, it's probably more nuanced than most people are interested in, but this is where some of the antics get played, right? There's the general rule, this is how we do things. And, the committee votes and there's a majority opinion, but the person who's presenting the bill to the House, for instance, because you're in the House, might present the minority opinion, even though there's a majority opinion. And have them vote on that one, because the chair of the committee has the ability to do that. I mean, and as you said, from the floor, it sounds like people can propose to go with either option. So they're not like in ultimate control, but like, it's the Democrats. And so it seems like this is one of the games they play where they allow something to get through committee with an ought to pass, but then they present the ought not to pass from the floor as the minority opinion and kind of put the position. So they get to say in committee, well, I voted in favor of it, knowing that party leadership was actually going to nix the bill on the floor.
That's correct. And, there are times where people, legislators in committee will vote on something, say a couple Democrats, and then we've seen this happen. Actually, one of the bills that I have slated to chat about today, where there was a couple Democrats that just didn't agree with the measure and they voted against it, which made the majority report an ought not to pass. But when it gets down to the House floor, the chair of the committee wants to see the bill pass, so they run the minority report ought to pass as amended, that 4 or 5 people voted for rather than the 7 people in the committee that voted against it. And does it feel like a big antic, like, oh, kind of a gotcha moment? Not really, but it also just undermines the integrity of the work of the committee. Like, what is the whole point of the committee sitting hour after hour, showing up early, staying late, digging through? Like, why am I in my bed at 2 a.m. reading through testimony and reading through this and just wanting to understand it to try to, make the best decision and either make the best argument for or against, if when we get down to the floor, the party in control just removes whatever report they want? It just is a slap in the face of all the committee work. And really, it's a slap in the face to the members of the committee, regardless of the party. Because oftentimes, where they're the party in control, oftentimes they're undermining their own people. They're undermining the will of their own people by moving a minority report because their people dared to vote with Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty run of the mill for the Democrats these days, right? And I also, like, again, I'm the skeptic and I look at it and I think, well, they did this on purpose. And even the people who voted, again, in line with Republicans probably did it knowing that it largely as a tactic to be able to position for their next election, to be able to say, hey, I voted this way, because they know that the people in their district want them to be more in line with the conservatives. And so I skeptically look at it. I'm like, this is all tactic, and the people who are voting don't care that it went against what they had voted for. And if they pretend to, they're probably playing a game. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm being, you're on the floor. You know more about that than I do. But I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I bet that was always part of the design, right? That's one of those, tactics that the Democrats use to get their way, no matter what, it seems. So
I think I've seen that strategically, like the votes being cast like that on the floor. And I can only speak for the Judiciary Committee. I will say very rarely have I seen Democrats say, well, I'm going to vote against this or vote in favor of this because otherwise I'll be slaughtered in my next election. In committee, at least, right? You can tell at times, like on certain votes that have to do with certain gun stuff, or really the gun regulation thing is the big one that you find Democrats who are in purple districts or in light blue districts, right? Districts where it's kind of even registered Republican, Democrat, unenrolled, where they'll wait to cast their vote until they've tallied everything up. And if it's going to be a decision maker, right? If my vote, and I will watch it, they'll consider, if my vote is going to be the vote that changes the outcome, well, I'll just simply vote with my party. But if it doesn't matter, I'll vote with these guys to make myself look more conservative, more moderate.
Yeah, no, that makes That makes sense. I mean, unfortunately, that's the game that's played in politics, and it's not. That's not a Democrat only tactic. Here in Maine, it is because the Democrats
Fair.
control everything for the most part. But I think that's something I usually say things like that. The issues that you see on the left are they exist to a degree on the right. They're just much more pronounced and much bigger of a problem on the left, where you might get that happening occasionally on the right. But for the most part, we're pretty principled in what we believe in and what we vote for, and we're pretty consistent there. So obviously that's kind of, you're on judiciary. So like one of the questions, one of the things that I was wondering is like, what are some, since your time being, again, I know I've paid attention to a couple of bills that have come before, and I'm trying to think that there was one recently where I really appreciated you speaking up, which I'm sure is not easy, or maybe at this point you just don't care. But when they had the boys and girls sports issue again this year, where I think it's Ann Carney is the chair of that committee, was having things start off and was basically saying, despite the fact that all communication previously had said everybody was going to have 3 minutes, she gets up and says, no, everybody has 2 minutes. And you kind of spoke up and said, every communication that we've had says that it's going to be 3 minutes. So it's a little strange. Obviously, you were very deferential in your response too, which to be able to do that, I have to give you a lot of credit, because like I think I would have a hard time. I would be like, why are you lying to the people? No, but you were very deferential, and you were like, and obviously as the chair, it's your prerogative to do what you want, but you've been telling people this, and now you're going to go and do this. And so I really appreciated you holding her to task, and she adjusted and still allowed people to have 3 minutes because, in large part because of what you said at that point.
Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned about deferential, and you always attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And I don't really know if I want to attract flies as much as these are people that I'm probably going to be working with together for at least the next few years, if not for a long time. And there are some issues, there are some policies that we can come together on. And the Judiciary Committee has proven it with some unanimous reports that have to do with either funding or reform within public defense services. A lot of legislation that's come through that could be controversial around domestic violence and sexual assault that have come out unanimous. Even issues around how to moderate AI and hold people accountable who are generating highly inappropriate material concerning minors. How to make sure that they go to prison for a very long time, and that we give law enforcement tools to succeed in those investigations. So the stakes are incredibly high when it comes to the policy that comes through the Judiciary Committee. And burning bridges doesn't do anything. Bridges are built and they're designed to be walked on. And, I think in those scenarios where, maybe the full intent of Senator Carney was to ensure people had 2 minutes and just to make the right-wing people shut up and get through them quicker. Maybe that was her intent. But calling it out for that and assigning intent to it, she's just going to dig her heels in. And I wanted people to be treated fairly. And when tactics like that are used in committee, and we've seen it time again with Senator Carney, both chairs of the committee, it's an erosion of trust in the system. And I want to give people a hope that the legislative process works, right? So if I have to show some deference, if I have to, even at times, I think there have been people within my party who felt like the way I handle those situations are considered weak, like I'm tiptoeing around people. The reality is there's a lot more in my head I want to say, but if we're going to be strategic and actually be effective in the political world, we have to handle people smartly. And maybe smartly isn't actually a word, right? Maybe that's not the correct grammatical word, but we have to handle people in a way that people are going to respond to. And again, the stakes are high. If we're going to pass legislation that really positively impacts people in the state of Maine, then in situations where it's pretty clear that those in power are not behaving right, the first approach should be, let's handle this a little bit more gently and see if we can come together on it. And then if they don't, I'll let all hell break loose, right? Like if there had not been any type of a, boy, Representative Henderson, you're right, let's change that back to 3 minutes, it would have been a different conversation afterwards.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. It reminds me of a line. There's a lot of things that I go back to movies, but from the movie The Patriot, where like when the British are fighting against the Americans, there's I guess is a lieutenant or whatever the heck he is that does some things that are not appropriate, and he's like, when we win this war, we're going to have to restore commerce with these people, and so these brutal tactics must stop. Right? Is kind of his get yourself in line. And there's a reality, and I think that plays into this a little bit, because there's a reality that even though maybe some of these people are not ever going to be able to be reached with reason, we have to maintain hope that some will. Maybe it will require us to be able to win and gain control and have the majority in order for them to realize the error of their ways. But also there may be a situation where, assuming that happens, we may need to work with them. And so like doing the best that you can to maintain a positive relationship with people and be respectful and all that other kind of stuff, I think is really important. I just can't, it's so difficult. I have had very little experience. I know that I've said some things that seem to trigger some of your fellow members. When I went and spoke, I was very proud of myself, by the way. When I spoke on the boys and girls sports, I ended my speech with 2 + 2 = 4. Actually, it was boys are boys, girls are girls, 2 + 2 = 4. And I feel like at least one member, it might have been Representative Kuhn, seemed to twitch at the end when she heard me say that. And I think it's a reality, and but people don't want to accept reality. But maybe that kind of a tactic is not something that I would employ if I was in the legislature. But also going and speaking at city council, and I see these people and I see how they look at me, and I think part of it for me is like wanting to respond in kind. It's very sinful of me, I would say, but wanting to like behave according to their behavior rather than, I think being maybe above it is another way to put it. But anyway, so interesting. Well, I appreciate your ability to have self-control in those moments and stick up for people at the same time. So tell us some of the things that have been going on in the legislature, some of what your experience is beyond what we just talked about. In terms of like, I think what are some, maybe, I don't remember exactly how I phrased it before. So, but like maybe what's one of the most frustrating losses that you've experienced in being in the legislature? One of the most frustrating situations where you were just so like, I wish I could have done something about it, but we failed because the Democrats are the Democrats.
Yeah, there's a few, right? There've been times where I've left the House chambers and been like, man, I just feel like I either let my district down or I let the business world down, and it just kind of like, not in a defeated way, like I'm going to quit or feel bad for myself, but you just feel the weight, not just the expectation, but the weight of the people that you're there to represent, and the weight of the truth, right? Like you carry around, and I don't own the truth. I just really try hard to seek it and to find it, right? Like I'm not in possession of the truth. It's just when I find it and when I know what the right thing is, and go in and lose consistently. And it's not that we lose, it's what we lose. Right? Like I can lose all day long if the stakes aren't high. I could lose all day long if it was just about me. I'd figure out a way to get along. But it isn't just about me. I'm not there to give people my opinion. I'm there to represent a whole contingent of people that are forgotten in Augusta. And it's the weight of that when we lose. So if I were to say one that's meant the most, maybe the one that's the most fresh on my mind is LD 127. And it was... And I'm sure that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for the sake of your listeners, LD 127 is a bipartisan bill. It's dead now. But there was a Republican senator and a Democrat senator that put in almost identical bills. The Republican senator showed deference to Senator Hickman, who's a Democratic senator, pulled his bill and let Senator Hickman move forward with his, but really was behind him the whole way, showed up at public hearings, showed up at work sessions, was working behind the scenes. And the bill was designed to allow members of the Government Oversight Committee, which is not a policy committee, it's an investigative committee. It investigates the government. It would allow these committee members. Go ahead.
Is it defunct? Does it exist? Does it really exist right now?
Well, that's just it.
I'm sorry.
Without access, right? Without access to this information. So again, this is designed to allow these members. The bill was designed to allow these members to gain access to confidential information, not just any confidential information that they wanted at any time about anybody. There's very clear-cut lines and rules and procedures and scenarios in which they could obtain this information during an investigation. Now, the Government Oversight Committee is compiled of 12 members, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats. It is designed to not be a political committee. No one party has majority. So in order to even see this confidential information, there had to be a vote of 2/3 of the committee itself, which was 8 out of 12 members. So at least 2 members of any other party. And that was a provision I put in the bill, I fought for in the bill to ensure it wasn't just a simple majority. Anyways, so the bill came out of committee very divided, but it came out bipartisan, Republican and Democrat support. It was a Senate bill, so it went to the Senate first, and it passed the Senate. Republicans and Democrats voted in favor of it. It came back to the House. Now, this is where some of the shenanigans come in place, right? So right now, the Democrats completely run the entire Capitol. They have both ends of the 3rd floor. They've got the House, the Senate, and the governor's office on the 2nd floor. But specifically the legislature, they run the whole building. So they determine when bills are brought before the House. They just determine what's on the schedule for that day. So they waited till essentially the last day, not essentially, the last day of the legislature of this year, outside of veto day. Veto day is the only other day. The last day of the legislature to allow this bill to be brought before the House for a debate. Brought it before the House. It passed the majority of the House. So the Senate voted in favor by majority. This is democracy, right? Is this not how democracy is supposed to work? It is. It passed the Senate. It passed the House. But Democratic leadership chose to pull a parliamentary move and object to the second reading, which requires it to be essentially can't be taken up for another legislative day. Well, if you follow the story, you know there are no more legislative days. We're on our last day. There's no way to object to that. It's just parliamentary procedure. So Democratic leadership circumvented the will of the entire legislature, even members of their own party, because they didn't want to see this bill pass.
And so because it's killed, it's not killed, not officially killed, but just delayed until the next day, and there is no next day. That means it's not even going to the next legislature. It's just done because that's only binding within this current legislature. Is that how that works?
Correct. So we did technically take it up on veto day, but the other piece of it was there was a fiscal note, and anytime there's a fiscal note, so that means that there's it's determined that it's going to cost the state money in order to implement this law. The fiscal note itself was a farce. I won't get into the details of that. It's a little bit too muddy. How about that?
Yeah.
But it would require it to go back to the Appropriations Committee to be funded. Well, guess who controls when the Appropriation Committee meets? Democratic leadership.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So there was no clear pathway for this bill from the get-go because they waited so long. So yeah, we took it up on veto day. We debated it. It passed the Senate again. It passed the House again. But then we adjourned for the year. And when we adjourn, sign, and die, every piece of legislation that hasn't been passed dies with it. So they didn't. It wasn't even about.
I think it's worth noting, right? Like, because I think I don't know if you highlighted this enough, because or if you even highlighted this element of what this bill. This is a bill that's giving legislative oversight to children under state care, because DHHS has many children that parents have lost their rights and they're technically under state care through the foster care program, et cetera. And we've had, I think Ray Richardson yesterday was talking about 150, really 154, but 4 of them haven't been adjudicated yet, children that have died in state care. And that's just children who have died, let alone the children that are abused and all of the other horrible things that can happen to kids in bad situations when people take advantage of them. And so this was basically because of the horrific problems that are happening in that department. 150 kids have died specifically under the Mills administration. And this is a department that's had problems in the past. And so this was saying this is a problem. It's a bipartisanly recognized problem. I think the biggest champion of getting this issue fixed is a guy by the name of honorary, but also recently deceased, Bill Diamond, who was a Democrat legislator in both the House and the Senate from the Windham area for decades. And this was one of the things that he was trying to work on during his time in the legislature and even after he left the legislature before he passed away. And so this is a bipartisan issue. It's about protecting children. This is not the normal politics and the issues where Democrats and Republicans tend to divide on. We tend to divide on social issues and on funding because the Democrats like to spend money. This is about protecting innocent, vulnerable children and recognizing that there's a problem. Well, I think that's where the problem comes in. Is the Democrats don't want to publicly admit in any way that there is a problem because they're in charge. And if they were to admit that there was a problem, they would have to address it, right? So I think that must be the issue.
And I think that you really pinpointed on, so I kind of gave the general idea of what the bill does. And it does give confidential information to GOC that would allow them to get details to the nature of whatever they're investigating. But the whole reason the bill was brought forward was because there has been 150 child deaths under DHHS, under their watch. Some of them, a number of them have been ruled either accidental or, disease or sickness. But there's 4 deaths in particular that are highly questionable, and that the GOC, or the Government Oversight Committee, is wanting to dig into the processes and procedures within DHHS on, okay, what happened? Where did things break down in the process here in these 4 child deaths? Is there any similarities, or, not for the sake of pointing fingers and, getting arrests and putting people in jail, but like the Government Oversight Committee has authority to investigate these things and then send recommendations back to DHHS and say, hey, you should really fix X, Y, and Z because these are areas in which you failed. So, and this was, I think, a couple years ago, the Government Oversight Committee had subpoenaed some records and had actually requested from a department within the legislature called OPEGA. They're the ones that get the confidential information. Requested that some of the information be redacted, and they essentially said no. So the Government Oversight Committee went to the law court and said, we want you to rule on this. We need this information. Children are dying. These children are dead, and we don't know why. We don't know what happened here. And the law court came back and said, well, you technically have the authority to have it, but you guys need to change the laws to make sure that it coincides. As state law stands right now, you can't have access to this. So what did the legislature do? Members of the legislature put a bill in to address it. And, the arguments against it, what I heard was, well, if If legislators leak any of this confidential information, they can't be held, they can't go to prison, they can't do jail time because of qualified immunity, because it's during the course of our legislative work. And it's like, look, I don't know anybody on that committee that is wanting to look for anything other than why kids are dying in state care, right? We might be the first branch of government, and there's the executive branch of government, but we're kind of all cogs in this. And in some ways, we're all culpable. People don't really care that I'm in the legislative branch and that's the executive branch. And, oh, I'm washing my hands because it's not my problem. The general public cares that kids are dying. And many legislators, Republicans and Democrats included, that voted for this bill also care about it. But whatever backdoor thing happened with Democratic leadership circumvented the will of the legislature to ensure that we got this information to figure out what's going on, to fix a problem. And there's no integrity in it. You know, look, at some point, Republicans are going to be in majority. And we're gonna make sure that that we enact laws that we know are what's best for Maine. But I can't imagine a world in which I wouldn't be screaming from the rooftops if this came from Republican leadership after the will of a legislature spoke. I mean, it goes completely against again, it's a slap in the face of the integrity of the process. You know, we have a legislative process, and to have one or two people, just because they're in leadership, be able to circumvent that with no explanation. We never got an explanation as to why. I mean, if they'd come to us and said, well, there's a T that's not crossed and we need one little bit in here, let's fix it. We never got an explanation as to why.
Yeah.
Just parliamentary fencing, using the rules against us, and really against the people of the state.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. And this is one of the things that if you're out there trying to be like, well, I don't agree with everything the Republicans do, it's like, yeah, no, I can understand that and appreciate that. The Democrats have gone too far, though. If you're on that side, you have values that more closely align with them. They don't care about their constituents. Democrats should be more angry than anyone about the behavior of Democrats in the legislature, because Democrats in the legislature and, you know, Mills herself and Bellows and Fry and all these people are not, doing their job. They're not like, representing their constituents, even the Democrats, like, let alone the Republicans that are in their districts. They're not representing their own constituents because they would have wanted this to pass, right? And there are other issues that fall into these lines. I mean, one of the best examples is the boys and girls sports issues. This is a pretty simple issue with most Maine voters. There's a way to handle it, and they refuse to handle it. Handle it appropriately, and ultimately, like, my hope is that this will come back on them in this election this year, and they'll reap the reward of their bad behavior.
Yeah, and there's so many of these types of examples, right, that I could go on about. I think maybe the last one I'll leave you with is, you talk about, or you just mentioned how it should be the Democrats who are calling out this inappropriate behavior and unethical and, at times immoral behavior. There was a bill that we worked in Judiciary Committee. And there was one of the Democrats on the bill, a couple of the Democrats, but one in particular who was really going to bat for a bill that Republicans were in favor of too. And not because it's a Republican bill, but because it's a measure that made sense. But somehow, the majority or most of the rest of the Democrats didn't agree with it, and especially both of the chairs of the committee. And there was information brought forward from the sponsor of the bill, who was a senator, and the chair of the committee would not allow that information to be distributed to committee members. When I asked for an expert witness to come up and speak at the work session, I was refused and told that we weren't going to relitigate, we weren't going to have another public hearing. I had to fight for that person to be able to come up and speak. So just really, and also, as far as the analyst goes, trying to keep the analyst from sharing certain information with us. which is a complete breach of ethics.
Yeah.
And when we walked out after we'd voted, me and this other Democrat walked out together, and they said to me, I don't mind a fight, but I want a fair fight. Now I know what it feels like to be a Republican in that committee. And it was like, you know what? I don't feel bad for you. Say something. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, regardless of the party in control.
Yeah.
Because there have been times.
I'll ask you off record who that is. I'm just kidding.
I won't share. But, you know, and there have been times too, like when the chair of the committee, and, you know, some of these things that they pull in committee, maybe that wasn't the last thing I'll share. Maybe this will be the last thing I share. But the chair of the committee decided after a long day, it had to do with a transgender bill, and I don't recall which one it was. But public comment, we knew it was going to be a long day. Decided at midnight that they were going to have a hard stop. We're not going past midnight. Well, it never said that in any of the communications. No members of the public were told that. And we had people online that had been waiting online 11 hours, 10, 11 hours, just waiting online to testify. And there was only 11, or I think there was 10 or 11 of them left. And they were all people that were in support of a bill that I was very much against. They were going to testify in support of this bill. Or maybe it was vice versa. Either way, there were people there to testify in opposite of how I was going to vote on it. And when the chair moved that said that she was going to end the committee early, I point of ordered her. And we had a long and lengthy discussion on just how inappropriate it was to make people wait all day. And then ended at midnight when they're still online waiting to testify. So it shouldn't matter what party you're with or what's being presented. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And I actually said on mic, I said, I'm getting ready. I'm advocating for people who disagree with me. Like, does anybody else see that? Like, you're getting ready to shut off people at a hard stop. It's just wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, and again, this is one of the things that we see out of the Republicans, that, you know, we are more interested in what's right and justice. And that's where, you know, again, a slight change from a quote from a biblical passage in the place of, you know, justice, we see corruption, essentially, is the name of this episode. And this is like what you see. Unfortunately, you're in judiciary. Judiciary is about justice. And yet what we see out of Democrat leadership that's guiding and controlling that is we see injustice, we see corruption, we see shenanigans, and it's unfortunate. So I don't want to keep you on here too long, but we're having a great conversation. I do want to hear, there are a couple other, I don't know if you have a hard stop, but I do want to hear about some opportunities that you've found to be able to work alongside and positively work with people that are not part of the Republican Party, because I do want to hear about those things, but also just in general, maybe it's the same answer, but like some big wins that you've had while being in the legislature.
Yeah, so there was the couple of pieces of legislation. I alluded to them earlier that had to do with some reform in funding for public defense services, which essentially is the state of Maine fulfilling its obligation to its constitutional requirement that we provide legal counsel to people charged with crimes, to those that can't afford it. So there's been some reforms, some funding in that that I've been able, to work together with. Again, so this is what's interesting. There are, in some cases, Democratic leadership frustrates me to no end. But then at other turns, like with this is an issue that, for the most part, there's some things we don't agree on, but that we've been able to work together on. Weekend conversations when it comes to funding, with how to handle this, talking to my people, talking to their people. And that's where the relationship building comes in. And sometimes just looking past the fact that they're a Democrat and maybe having a little bit of faith in them in that moment, that we can try to build something for the state, right? Stepping out and having a little bit of trust in me. Well, I might get burned here, or there's a chance that my words might be used against me, or there's a chance that I'm going to try and fall flat on my face, but I'm going to try because it's the right thing for the people of the state. And I've built really good and solid friendships with people across the aisle. I don't think for a moment that every single legislative Democrat walks into the building with ill intent. There are a lot of them that I don't trust their moral framework, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't trust what their fundamentals are, but I think that there are some there that really want to do what's best for their community. At times it's filtered through a lot of anger and misconceptions about how the world works. Anyways, that I think might be another whole like psychological discussion.
Sure.
But yeah, built really good friendships with people across the aisle, and that has made it so that either I've been involved in conversations I wouldn't normally, or I've been able to involve others in conversations. One of which was an actual one bill that I'm really proud of, and I'm really proud of the Republican caucus and the work that they put in on it was LD 524. And it was a Democrat sponsored bill, and it had to do with artificial intelligence. And I don't want you to get in trouble on social media platforms, so I'll use different terminology. But predators who use AI to generate grotesquely inappropriate images and videos of either real minors or AI generated minors and use it to distribute to others. And when the bill language came in, immediately I had two other representatives that reached out to me and a senator that reached out to me and said, hey, have you read this? What do you think? There's some language in there I'm really concerned with. So we put a Zoom meeting together, I don't know, 20, 25 Republicans, the 2 days before Christmas, I think. And like, let's dig into this. So we went through, dug into it, identified 3 issues that we were really concerned with. And then we just started educating ourselves. We had another Zoom meeting about a week and a half later, and then a third one, maybe the first week of the legislature. And maybe my timelines are off, but we had a total of 3 between just before Christmas and January. And I reached out to some out-of-state legal analysis or legal analysts, had them kind of look through it and run through it, and then we just dug into it in committee. And two of the concerns were, two of the concerns that we had brought up as Republicans were just like explained away. It made sense, right? Like once you start to understand the context. And then that third one, through the relationships that have been built through Democrat members of the Judiciary Committee, that language was taken out. The language that we were really concerned with was taken out, that exempted schools and libraries and whatnot from having this content in it. So, and then it ended up coming out of Judiciary Committee unanimous. But, you know, that never would have happened if, again, kind of going back to the very first part of this podcast, that never would have happened if there hadn't have systematically been year after year after year of approaching issues that could potentially be, you know, laden with conflict, very contentious, with a little bit of kid gloves and a little bit of honey, and building relationships and trying to build some trust so that when we enter into a conversation about a really consequential bill and piece of legislation, we're making it so that everybody can come together and vote for it. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Hard to do. I don't know that I'm cut out for it, but I'm glad that you're there to do this meaningful work. I'll show up and say some provocative things from time to time, and try to
takes all kinds.
I do try to be respectful. I think some people see what I say as being stronger, and again, I did have fun with the comment that I made at the end of my speech. I think is true, and I was highlighting a reality. 2 + 2 = 4. Part of the reason I was referencing that just for fun is that's 1984, right? Like I believe that the transgender issue is our 1984 moment, where if in that society they made people believe that if the party were to tell you that 2 + 2 = 5, then 2 + 2 = 5, even though we know that 2 + 2 = 4. And it creates, you have to do this double think where you know the truth, but you have to say that something that's not truth. Anyway, the transgender movement is that type of issue. And we know reality, but if they can convince enough people to agree with them that boys are anything other than boys and girls are anything other than girls, then they've won. Then they can control you and they can get you to do whatever they want you to do. And so that was really where the reference was going. It wasn't just meant to it wasn't just meant to trigger people and get a fun response. There was a little bit of that. I'm a little bit of a narcissist, can't do a podcast in the 21st century and not be a little bit of a narcissist, right?
Well, listen, we're legislators. Okay. We've got not an easy job. People should be able to handle a couple of comments.
They should.
Right?
I would think so.
Like, come on.
Yeah. It could be far worse. So anyway, so I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and just thankful that we have people like you representing us there in Augusta. And I'm sure there are plenty more things that we could talk about, but I don't want to keep you too long. Is there anything else? Obviously, you're running for re-election, right? The legislature is basically done at this point until the next. I mean, I think there are some minor things that you guys do behind closed doors that most people don't know anything about, and I barely even understand when you're not in session. But basically, not much going on until the election in November.
Yes, that's correct. I do serve on the Right to Know Advisory Committee, which is not a legislative committee, but it was created by the legislature, and it oversees all of Maine's freedom of access laws. So we not only kind of comb through all of the freedom of access laws, all the exemptions to public information, but then when the legislature asks us to review certain things, like, hey, can you take a look at this? Or if there's bills that come before the legislature that might not be ready to vote on, like it's just not there yet, they might be sent to the Right to Know Advisory Committee. And that is comprised of only 2 legislators. I think it's a 21-person or 18-person committee. And it's everyone from, the press, the newspapers, someone from IT, someone from law enforcement, someone from the schools. And we all come together and discuss. So we'll have a few of those committee meetings. I said all that to say we'll have a few of those committee meetings the end of the year, and then we might do some like judicial nominations. But yeah, as far as actual legislating, legislators have gone home for the year. We can't do any more damage to the state. So good news.
That's fortunate. that's some good news. And now it's campaign time. So, and everybody out there, like, we need more people. Obviously, Rachel needs help. We got to help her get reelected, obviously, but we also got to get, which I don't think will be a challenge where you're located. My guess is,
I hope
you should
not.
have a pretty easy race. But other places in the state, we all have to do our part and help get our candidates elected. We need, House, Senate, and the governorship, as well as Susan Collins, Paul LePage, and whoever wins the primary to go against Shelley Pingree. We got to do everything we can to support all the candidates. We can take back our legislature here in the state of Maine. We can win the governor's seat, but it requires all hands on deck. Everybody has to be working together. Let's hope, let's work toward that. And hopefully we can have a much more exciting podcast in a year after the Republicans have won and we've actually done good things and we're fixing the problems in our state. That would be really exciting. So thanks for coming on, Rachel, and for everything that you do.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's great to connect.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. And thanks to everybody at home. We'll see you back here, I think Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, is the next